There are probably no two countries in the world that hate each other as much as Israel and Iran. Both governments regularly send threatening gestures towards the other country and demand the complete annihilation of their opponent. But surprisingly, this has not always been the case. For most of history, and even up until a few decades ago, both states can be considered best friends in the Middle East. Iran was one of the first states to recognize the existence of Israel in the 1940s, and the two cooperated very closely not only economically, but also militarily and politically. Iran supplied Israel with cheap oil and Israel trained Iranian officers. In terms of foreign policy, they pursued the same goals and dominated the Middle East. But then things suddenly changed. So what led to the end of the close relationship, how best friends became arch-enemies, and why the enmity could now trigger a conflagration in the Middle East? We take a look at all these fascinating questions in today's video. The Middle East has always been a melting pot of civilizations and cultures. And so relations between Jews and Persians go way back to ancient times. In the context of Iranian-Israeli relations, it is therefore crucial to understand the historical roots of both nations and their relationship with each other. For even ancient Persia, which many consider to be the precursor state of modern-day Iran, had close relations with the Jewish community. One of the best-known examples is the story of King Cyrus the Great, who ended the Babylonian captivity in around 539 BC and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and build the Second Temple. And these good relations have been relatively stable throughout history. Even during the Second World War, Iran rescued many Jews and, in particular, numerous children fled from Germany and Poland to Iran. They later became known as the Tehran Children. Although Iran was an ally of the Nazi regime until August of the year 1941, it abhorred Hitler's racial ideology. It negotiated a treaty with the Third Reich that protected all Iranian citizens from German aggression. And as a result, Iran issued many Jews with Iranian passports to protect them from the Germans and give them the opportunity to leave for Iran. As a result, Jewish life in Persia flourished in Iran and, alongside Palestine, it was regarded as the main place of residence for Jews in the Middle East. And with the founding of the Jewish state in the year 1948, these good relations continued. Iran was the second Muslim-majority country after Turkey to recognize Israel as a sovereign state. In comparison, we see that most Muslim states still do not do so today. And both states regarded each other as close allies from the outset. Both states were close allies of the USA and the West, and they strove for joint dominance over the Middle East. This was supported above all by the USA, which saw the Tehran-Tel Aviv axis as an indispensable part of its geostrategic concept in the Middle East. During the Cold War, Israel and Iran secured the rich energy sources in the region and the borders between the Western and Soviet spheres of influence. And both states also benefited incredibly from the good relations between them. For while Iran supplied Israel with oil, Israel supported Iran with state-of-the-art technologies and in the implementation of major industrial projects. And both governments also worked on numerous joint military projects. For example, the Project Flower missile project, which was kept under wraps for a long time and only later became public knowledge. And above all, the two states were always on the same page in terms of foreign policy. When Israel was invaded by its neighboring states, including Syria, Egypt and Jordan, during the Six-Day War, Iran officially remained neutral. However, it now supported Israel even more generously with oil and exerted direct influence on the Arab states to cease hostilities. So we can see that Israeli-Iranian relations, or those of their predecessor states, were very friendly for most of history. But this changed abruptly from one moment to the next. For in the year 1979, Iran was seething, and this was mainly due to one man, Ayatollah Khomeini. Back in the early 1960s, the Shiite cleric described the then Shah as a Jew in disguise and a recipient of orders from Israel. And hatred of Israel was to become one of the central points of his foreign policy. For it was precisely this man who overthrew the pro-Western regime of Shah Pahlavi in the Iranian Revolution in the year 1979 and founded the Islamic Republic of Iran under his sole leadership. This revolution was not only a political upheaval but also a radical ideological change. The new regime in Iran was deeply religious and anti-Western. Khomeini and his followers regarded the USA as the Great Satan and Israel as the Little Satan. They firmly rejected Western influence and the State of Israel in particular. And so Iran immediately broke off all diplomatic and commercial relations with Israel, and the theocratic government revoked its recognition of the State of Israel. And Iran now strove to assume a leading role in the Islamic world and export its revolutionary ideals. This led to numerous tensions with neighboring states, including Israel, over the next few decades. But the turn to open hostility then began in the early 1990s, shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the defeat of Iraq in the Gulf War. As a result, the relative power in the Middle East shifted towards Iran and Israel, and they repeatedly clashed in proxy wars. Iran became a major supporter of groups and movements fighting against Israel, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon and later Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. And Israel's secret service actively worked to sabotage the Iranian nuclear program, which repeatedly led to the inexplicable disappearance or death of Iranian scientists. They have been waging a covert war against each other for decades, but have not shied away from openly threatening each other with mutual annihilation. In Syria in particular, which was ravaged by civil war from 2011, the two states clashed time and again. Iran supported the Assad regime, while Israel was concerned about the growing Iranian influence in its neighboring country. This led to occasional direct confrontations between Israeli and Iranian forces in Syria. And in cyber warfare, both sides regularly launch attacks on critical infrastructure. But we also need to understand the underlying geopolitical component. Israel is a close ally of the West, especially the USA. Iran, on the other hand, sees itself as a close ally of Russia and China. And so the new Cold War between the superpowers is also reflected in the region. Iran created the so-called Axis of Resistance, a coalition of various non-state actors and militias in the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and various Shiite groups in Iraq and Syria. However, Israel is also looking for new partners and allies in the region. And it found these above all in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, which normalized their relations with Israel 2020 years ago. And this year, another powerful player in the region was on the verge of establishing relations with Israel, Saudi Arabia. The Saudis also saw Iran as one of their main enemies, and these two states also fought each other time and again in proxy wars such as in Yemen. And so it seemed that Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the verge of rapprochement, according to the motto, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Many therefore speculate that the timing of the attack on Israel by Iran-backed Hamas was not chosen without reason. After all, an alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia would naturally be a thorn in Iran's side and would dismember its claims to power in the region. However, with Israel's harsh reaction against the Gaza Strip, negotiations with the Saudis appear to be a distant prospect for the time being. And now Iran is also threatening to activate other allies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq. Tehran is also increasingly talking about intervening against Israel. Just a few days ago, the Iranian leadership warned that it would feel compelled to launch a preemptive strike in the event of further military action by Israel. And Israel is also threatening Iran if it continues to interfere in the current military actions. So we can see how quickly the situation in the Middle East could spiral out of control. Former close allies have become bitter archenemies. And it is no longer just a dispute between the two states, but part of the overarching geopolitical struggle between East and West, in which more and more super-regional players have their fingers in the pie.